So, this was a brief summary. Let's now welcome Géraldine Camilleri, who has received the 2014 Research Award. She's going to give us an update. Her presentation is on intuitive and mindful eating. She's going to tell us about the NutriNet research project. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. My presentation will be somewhat different. I'm going to report on some of my recent research on intuitive and mindful eating. And we'll talk about the obesity status as well. This was my thesis, which I submitted in 2015 under the supervision of Serge Erdberg and
pourquoi s'intéresser à l'obésité et la consommation alimentaire? L'obésité, on le sait, c'est un enjeu, un problème majeur de santé publique dans le monde.
Why did I decide to engage in this project? Well, first of all, because obesity is a major public health issue. It is widely accepted that psychological aspects have an impact on eating behavior. So far, we've looked a lot at negative aspects. For example, eating in response to certain emotions. The consequences of diets, cognitive responses, as well as externalities. Some authors are, however, suggesting that there are positive or adaptive behaviors that are causing people to maintain in shape without negative consequences. And it can't just, we can't just, they're actually based on the individual strength of people. So what kind of behaviors do we have? Well, we have what we call intuitive eating, based on signals, signals of repletion or hunger, for example, without any sense of guilt. We can also, and then there's mindful eating. Mindful eating means becoming more conscious about any interaction between oneself and food, without, again, any negative connotations. The idea of mindfulness is the consciousness on the here and now, without any judgment. So we've actually used data coming from NutriNet-Santé. NutriNet is a large prospective cohort which was launched back in 2009 on a very large population of adult people, looking at the connection between nutrition, health, and behavior. There is a vast amount of data coming from NutriNet. Every year, respondents have to enter information 3 times a year for 24 hours of food consumption, on physical activity as well, on economic and socio-demographic information, and some monthly specific questionnaires are being sent out yearly as well. So in the research I'm going to present, we had samples going anywhere between 41,536 and 63,000 people. So to understand obesity, we looked at the BMI, of course, to put people in different categories, BMI categories, and we took people who had at least 6 24-hour recordings to have a better understanding of their standard food consumption and patterns. So we modeled this. I won't go into the details of the modeling. So the models were adjusted according to a number of factors: socio-demographic, exercise, economic factors as well. The analyses were done for men and women separately, and we did a transversal association, which means at a specific point in time. So, starting with intuitive eating. Literature on intuitive eating is very limited. There has been some research that has shown that weight is maintained, that there is no weight loss. There have been, in observational studies, there have been opposite findings. But globally speaking, these research projects were done on homogeneous populations. So,
sur l'approche épidémiologique de ce concept avec des échantillons plus diversifiés de population.
To understand the concept, we need a measurement of intuitive eating. We had nothing, we didn't have such a thing in France, so we had to adapt the existing questionnaire, which was in English, and translate it into French. So we had a three-dimensional questionnaire in French. Eating for physical reasons rather than emotional, so we call this physical reasons. For example, I find different ways to manage stress besides food. Signals of hunger or repletion, and unconditional permission, which means I do not follow any specific rules that tell me what, when, and how much to eat. So we have 18 in total that have been translated from English into French, and they are on a scale from I do agree very much or I do not agree at all. So, the intuitive eating scores come in 4 quadrants. So we have quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have very large samples once again. So most of the associations that are significant are here. We're looking at the ones that above and below 5%, except for the energy intake, in which case it's easier to reason in terms of, to quantify in terms of absolute terms. So, for the first dimension, physical reasons, women had higher had lower intakes. Men and women had lower grease intakes, and women specifically had lower dairy, meat, and fish intakes, and would consume dry fruit and in terms of repletion, same thing. We're observing the same thing for women. Men and women have higher scores, less dairy and less meat and fish. And women would consume more dry fruit, as well as whole starch, including pulses. And the last one, unconditional. And again, these results are very different. Men and women had higher energy intakes and less healthy food, with less fruit and vegetables, less starch, more sugar and greasy food, fast food, snacks. Now, looking at the connection with weight, these are the results for women. And what we observed is that for women who have a higher intuitive eating score are less likely to be overweight and are less likely to be obese. The ratios are very strong, 0.09, sorry. This is true for all dimensions, and it's clearly the stronger for the physical reasons dimension. So much for women. For men, the association patterns are the same, but the associations are not as strong. So, in summary, people with higher scores for physical reasons, women, for example, have lower energy intakes. Men and women consume less sugar and greasy food. For hunger and repletion signals, we have less consumption of meat and dairy products, but we have more starch and dry fruits for women. once again, with less of an energy intake for women. For the final dimension, the unconditional permission, we were able to point out a negative association with weight, and yet people who score higher have higher energy intake and a less healthy diet. So this goes against the initial assumption, which was to say that if you have that unconditional permission, you're less likely to lose control and be more responsive to external signals, and therefore you should eat less. Or at least not more. Again, so it goes against restrictive cognition. In literature, we were able to show, some studies were able to show that cognitive restriction was associated to healthier food, with lower energy intake, which would correlate with this. But the problem is we have this one inconsistency here between association with consumption and weight. So how do we explain this? Well, it could be the opposite. Some people who score higher, who have weight, who have no weight problems, don't specifically pay attention to what they consume, and therefore they score higher on the unconditional permission. Or maybe they need some level of control to eat healthy food. And last but not least, it could also be, the methodology may have some limits as well. Oftentimes we attribute things to maybe we're not capturing some of the cycles that we haven't investigated. Now let's move on to the mindful eating, which I haven't defined before. Mindful eating or conscious eating. Maybe I did define it. I can't remember. It's specific attention being given to the moment, to the here and now, without any judgment of value. It can be developed by actually practicing, by training mindfulness. We call them mind-body practices in English. It doesn't really translate into French. We just call them technical or psycho-physical techniques, which put our thoughts in connection with the body. Things such as meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, or Qigong, as well as sophrology. Again, there is very little literature on this topic, observational literature or anything else. We're showing we have very few results, and the methodology has its limits to the point that sometimes the results are actually challenged. No rigorous studies have ever examined the connection between mindful eating and food. There was one study which was held in the US, but only around yoga. So this study, we used this questionnaire, which is the 5 Facets Mindfulness Questionnaire, FFMQ, which investigates daily mindfulness with 5 dimensions, as you can see here. So we have the first one is observation, observing what surrounds us. Description is our capacity or ability to use words to describe feelings. Act in a mindful way, which means not in a mechanical way. Non-judgmental, which means not judging, accepting your thoughts and emotions. And non-reactivity or non-responsiveness means that I let my emotions go back and forth without being overwhelmed by them. So here are the results for women. We have the connection between mindfulness and the obesity status. Women who score higher are less likely to be overweight and are even less likely to be obese. The same association can be found in all dimensions, especially for the observation one. For man, now, things are quite different. We're seeing that the association can only be found for obesity. Observation and non-reactivity, not at all. The last aspect of this presentation is practicing mindfulness. And again, we have some interesting results here. There is very little literature in France available on this specific subject. On NutriNet-Santé, 27% of individuals already used psychophysical techniques. 14 are still using them today. It's mainly meditation for the majority, then yoga, sophrology, Qigong, Tai Chi, and an others line. Here are the results once again, and as you can see, people who are using these techniques are less likely to be overweight or obese, and it is quite linear. If you practice on a regular basis, you are indeed less likely versus those who never practice any of these occupations. So the connection is quite strong. We've also adjusted the models to the quality of food and energy intake to make sure that it wasn't just explained by the fact that they had a healthier diet. And again, we're finding the same associations. So, in summary, these are the early findings which are showing a connection between mindfulness and the obesity status for both men and women. For women, we were able to demonstrate that mindfulness is inversely connected to the obesity status. For men, we have just observation and non-responsiveness. For intuitive eating, and then the final question, why do people who score higher in terms of unconditional permission less likely to be obese? So these are still questions that have yet to be addressed. And putting things a bit in perspective now, this clearly shows that there is a shift in paradigm, and that it would be interesting to look at the positive behaviors and not just negative considerations. Some additional food for thought. This could be interesting in terms of primary prevention. We think that some programs, public health programs, ought to be further pushed in order to have better understanding of these connections. Here are just some examples coming from other countries. Japanese recommendations, for example, make sure you have delicious meals that are both healthy for your mind and for your body. German recommendations, one recommendation says, take your time, take a break in the middle of a meal. Don't eat too quickly. Take the time you need to have a healthy meal. This is also important in terms of repletion. Secondary prevention. We think with mindful and intuitive eating that it is important to have a better connection with food, and which is difficult in today's world. And last but not least, it is important to insist on the connection between the mind and the body to have that full state of well-being, which is really the definition of health or healthy. I would like to thank the Bonduelle Foundation for this award and for organizing this event every year. Thanks for having us together, Mr. Serge Ellsberg and Sandrine Penaud, as well as the entire research on nutritional epidemiology. All the other contributors as well, thank you for your attention. And should you like to get more information, feel free to go to the NutriNet-Santé website. Thank you. Thank you very much, Géraldine, for sharing with us all the work you've accomplished since you received the Louis Bonduelle Foundation Award. What's next? What are you going to be working on in the future? Do you have any additional projects? Well, I think that some of my next work will be to continue what I've just presented, but of course see if it confirms over a longer period of time, and see if mindful and intuitive eating protects us in a way. But we need more time to establish this for a fact. And then with Sandrine Penaud, we're also going to be continuing some of the work on the positive approach of food behaviors. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.